Alright, so I've been seeing this topic here and there, and I've been meaning to address it, so I figure we go ahead and tackle it now. From user JN, he says, do we know where Gil ended up when that wormhole ate him at the end of the UB-Dub route? Like speculations and things of that nature. This is something that I really wouldn't mind seeing the story expand on. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your requests. So for the topic at hand, this goes to the end of the UB-Dub route, right after Shirou had his fight with Gilgamesh inside of his reality marble. He comes outside, and once Shirou believes that everything is finally all over, we see a black hole start to form out of nowhere. Specifically in the novel, it was called a black void, and it starts to appear on top of Gilgamesh's body and start to suck him in. The void was trying to take him inside of it, and it's even described to be this vacuum that sucks up foreign bodies that get near it. So that's what we have on the board. Why did this hole appear? What was Gilgamesh's intentions? What would have happened if Archer didn't step in and intervene, thereby saving Shirou? And where would the story have went if Shirou actually got sacrificed instead of Gilgamesh and the void took him inside of it? So the interesting thing here is that it was never necessarily called a wormhole. Even in the novel, it never says where this hole was going. The only thing that's mentioned, and this is by Gilgamesh, is that the hole was looking for a replacement after the original Grail vessel had been erased and Ren had saved Shinji. All of this was happening while Shirou was in his fight against Gil, even after Ren had used her command spells to make Saber get rid of it with her Excalibur blast. So if we're basing it off of what the story is implying, this hole actually led nowhere, and it was more so leaning towards a path of the Fate route. If you remember, in the Fate route, Kirei was using Ilya to sustain the Greater Grail. He had her floating in the air in the background while he was fighting against Shirou. And essentially, this black hole opened up on top of Gilgamesh because he's one of the few things that's not supposed to be there. Again, even though Gil had a body, that doesn't change the fact that he's still a servant. So the Greater Grail, or at least what's left of it, this void, is looking at him like a body that can be used as a replacement. But another thing that Gil goes into, and he says this while it's happening, is that this Grail is stupid. Does it not know that it can't use servants as its base? So even Gil himself is saying whatever the Grail was trying to do by sucking him in, it wouldn't have worked, which is why when Archer intervened and Shirou stepped out the way and Archer sniped Gilgamesh, nothing happened afterwards. It took him into the void, and that was it. That's all she wrote. However, in the alternate case scenario, and we can see that Gilgamesh was able to straggle along by wrapping Enkidu around Shirou, and he was actually trying to pull himself out. And the implication here is that he could have pulled himself out if Shirou gave him enough time and Archer didn't come to save him. The worst part about that is not only would Gil still have survived, but this would have been exactly what he wanted, because now Shirou would be in the place of Shinji, and he would be operating as the base of the Greater Grail, and thus Gil could continue on with his plans with nobody else in his way to stop him. Again, and this is also something that needs to be addressed, there's been a community theory for a long time that Archer was resummoned as a counter guardian. This never happened. We debunked that on the channel years ago. He mentioned out of his own mouth in the novel that he stuck around to make sure that everything was alright. So this could actually give form to that scenario really happening, because now with nobody to stop Gil, he becomes an actual threat. Remember, the very nature of the hole appearing means that Saber took down the Grail before. She's already disappearing because she's exhausted all of her energy. Ren might try to do her best to fend Gil off as much as she could, but after Saber is gone, there's nothing that she can do. The reason that Archer was able to snipe Gil is because he had no idea that he was still still around, and he was also distracted. He was getting sucked in by the void. But if Gil gets out and has Shirou get swallowed instead, there's no distraction for Gil, which means Archer can't snipe him, and that last chunk of energy that Archer used before he actually disappeared would do him no good. I think a lot of people forget that Gil was defeated, but he wasn't finished. All Shirou did was beat him inside of his reality marble. The dude was completely fine. He could still fight. He just lost an arm. So going back into what I was saying before, now Gil is a low-level threat to the world, which means that we can actually get a counter guardian scenario, because unlike what Darius did in Prisma Ilia, where his intentions of taking over the world was hidden by Pandora's box, Gil outright stated that what he wanted to do was very straightforward. So in that vein, and this is pre-Grand Servants, I don't think they would even send a Grand Servant out for this yet. It's not on that level, but this is pre-Grand Servants. So then the situation becomes whoever gets summoned, whether it be Emiya or some other counter guardian, they have to face off with Gil and they have to deal with him. The problem with that is we don't know exactly what would happen if Gil gained power over the Grail and it continued to flood the world. There's no telling what would happen to his composition, if he himself might end up getting some type of upgrade. I mean, it did give him a whole body the first time around, right? So there's really no telling. He could get his arm back, or even worse. Or if Shirou wasn't meant to be a Grail vessel, so he ends up changing, something may happen to his body. He might end up serving Gilgamesh for all we know, because of all the evils taking over him. Just think back when Shirou was fighting against Kirei in the Fate route and he was throwing the Grail mud at him. 2 seconds of being in the Grail mud and Shirou was going insane. It's actually impressive in and of itself that he was able to survive those hits and live to walk it off. So he does have some durability against it, but if you're talking about nobody else being there to save him and he just gets submerged, there's nothing that he can do. And it's funny because there is a bad end for this, a bad end and a Tiger Dojo. And even in that, Nasu leaves it very open-ended. And this is before Archer showed up. Basically, Shirou says, if I'm gonna go down, I might as well take Gil with me. And he gets submerged in the evils and it completely cuts off. He just leaves everything up to speculation. So if Gil was actually successful, even going by the bad ending, it can go many ways. So this would end up being a continuation of the UB-Dub route that becomes dangerous on the level of a Heaven's Field. Just because Emiya shows up doesn't mean, okay, he's gonna pop up and use his counter guardian powers to one-shot Gil. People often forget the world only imbues you enough to get the job done. And if it has to give you more, it will. If it has to send out reinforcements, it will. But that doesn't mean that Emiya is gonna come back and he's gonna be super broken. That's fan fiction. But he will be better than he was before, and it will be a sight to see. Considering that the event is just starting, the world isn't gonna imbue him that much anyway. It does tend to take its time with these types of things. This could potentially be really bad, because who's to say that now that Shirou is being used as the base, that Angra can't be born again? We already know from the events of Ataraxia that he's conceptually compatible to Angra. So in the worst case, if Gil is able to hold Emiya off long enough and Shirou just so happens to get sacrificed and Angra uses his body as a vessel, he could essentially be born and do what he wants. And then that opens up a whole nother slew of problems. And not the Angra from Ataraxia who is just a placeholder, I mean the real evil Angra. For all we know, he might kill Gilgamesh too, because his hate is indiscriminate. So he's going after everybody. If you remember the arms that was coming out of Shinji's body when Gil constructed the fake vessel, they were trying to attack him too. They didn't care who it was, and that's why he pulled out Aya to rip it apart. Now if it was Heaven's Field, Angra could have had loyalty to Sakura because it was birthed through her, but it wasn't birthed via a sacrifice like it is now. That's a completely different ball game. Now we do know that Emiya has went up against several different types of phantasmal beasts and spirits in his past, but he's never went up against a beast of humanity. That would also be a sight to see. Closest thing we got to that is Emiya Alter putting the final hit on Kiara. Will the world's empowering be enough, or would they have to send out another counter guardian, one that we've never seen before?